Genjigo was not accustomed to surprises, especially ones that could change the course of his life forever. As a human warrior, he had traveled across countless planets, fought battles that no one thought possible, and earned respect from species far more powerful than his own. He had seen it all, or so he thought. The day he was called to the Zithrarian Queen's chambers was no different than any other. He stood at the entrance of the Grand Hall, a towering structure made of alien materials he still didn't fully understand. His mind was focused, ready to hear the Queen's next instructions. But what he didn't expect was the news that awaited him. The Queen, a majestic and powerful being, sat upon her throne. Her skin shimmered with the faint glow of her people, her eyes as deep as the vast galaxies themselves. She had always been an imposing figure, a symbol of strength, intelligence, and command. But today there was something different about her. "Genjigo," she began, her voice calm yet serious. "I have news that will change everything. I am pregnant." The words hit Genjigo like a shockwave. For a moment, he couldn't process what he had just heard. He stared at her, not fully understanding the magnitude of her words. Pregnant. The idea seemed absurd. How could this alien queen, powerful, regal, untouchable, be carrying a human child? He didn't even remember anything that would have led to this moment. He had barely spent any time alone with the Queen outside of their meetings, and certainly not in a way that would suggest something like this was possible. His mind raced. His first instinct was anger. His second was confusion. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't push away the reality of the situation. There was no denying it. The Queen was indeed carrying his child. "I don't understand," Genjigo muttered, his voice a mix of disbelief and frustration. "How did this happen? Why didn't you tell me sooner?" The Queen's expression softened, but there was no sign of regret in her eyes. "This was never planned, Genjigo, but it is a reality now, and it is not just a personal matter. This child could unite our peoples, change the future of the galaxy." The words hung in the air, and Genjigo felt the weight of her statement. The child wasn't just a surprise. It was a symbol of something much larger than either of them could understand. A bridge between two species that had never before seen eye to eye. "I didn't choose this," the Queen continued, her voice steady. "But I will protect this child. And I ask you, Genjigo, to stand by me." For a long moment, there was silence. Genjigo's mind was still spinning, trying to make sense of what he had just learned. He had always been a soldier, following orders, making decisions in battle. But this was something entirely different. How could he, a simple human warrior, be a part of something so monumental? Finally, he spoke, his voice quieter now, but still filled with uncertainty. "I never signed up for this, but I'll help. I'll find a way to make this work. For you, for the child." The Queen nodded, her eyes showing a glimmer of hope. They were at the beginning of something much bigger than either of them could predict. And though Genjigo didn't know what lay ahead, he knew one thing for sure. His life would never be the same again. Genjigo stood outside the Queen's chambers, his mind in a whirlwind. His thoughts couldn't settle. A human and an alien child. The Queen's words echoed in his mind. "I am pregnant." He had always known that life in the galaxy was strange, but this was beyond anything he had ever imagined. His emotions were all over the place: anger, confusion, and even a bit of fear. He wasn't ready to be a father, let alone to an alien child. He had spent his life fighting wars, not raising a family. But the Queen's calm assurance, her belief that this child could unite their species, kept playing over and over in his head. Could this really be true? Was he really a part of something that could change the galaxy? After a long moment of hesitation, Genjigo walked into the Queen's chamber, trying to shake off the storm of emotions swirling inside him. The Queen was still sitting on her throne, looking more serene than he felt. "You seem troubled," she said, her voice as steady as always. But there was a softness to it now. something almost comforting. I don't know what to think, Genjigo admitted, his voice rough. How can this be happening? A human and a Zithrarian child. This doesn't make sense. The queen's expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of something, regret, perhaps, or maybe empathy. I understand your confusion. This was not something either of us expected. But it is the reality we face now. And it is not just about us, Genjigo. This child could be the key to bridging the divide between our people. You may not realize it, but you have been chosen for a reason. Genjigo shook his head. Chosen? By who? This wasn't my choice. I didn't ask for this. I know, the queen replied softly. But sometimes we do not get to choose our destiny. Our paths cross for reasons we do not yet understand. Genjigo's fists clenched at his sides. The weight of her words pressed down on him. He had spent his life controlling his own fate, always in command, always in control of what happened next. But now he felt powerless. This was something bigger than him, bigger than anything he had ever dealt with before. Are you telling me to accept this without question? He asked, his voice rising in frustration. To accept that I'm supposed to be part of some prophecy, that I'm supposed to raise a child with you. I'm a soldier, not a father. The queen stood, her presence overwhelming as she walked toward him. You are more than a soldier, Genjigo. And this child is more than a symbol of your weakness. It is a chance to change the course of history. Our people, the Zithrarians, have fought wars for centuries. This child, our child, could be the beginning of a new era, but only if we stand together. Her words had a strange effect on Genjigo. He didn't know whether he was more confused or more intrigued. The queen wasn't just talking about politics. She was talking about something deeper, something that went beyond her people, beyond him, and maybe even beyond their galaxy. The silence between them was heavy, but Genjigo could feel the weight of her expectations. He had never been one to shy away from a fight, but this wasn't a battle he knew how to fight. And yet, he couldn't deny the strange pull he felt towards this impossible situation. I don't know how to do this, he confessed quietly. But I will try. For you, and for the future of this child. The queen nodded, her gaze softening just a fraction. That is all I ask, Genjigo. Together, we can make this work. We can create a future neither of us imagined. As he looked into her eyes, Genjigo felt a sense of determination building within him. Whatever the future held, he knew one thing. He couldn't turn away now. He was in this, whether he wanted to be or not. Genjigo sat alone in his quarters, staring out into the starry void outside the window. His mind was racing, too many thoughts clashing inside. The galaxy, once so simple and predictable, now felt like a maze he couldn't navigate. The queen's pregnancy, the child. Everything about this felt foreign, impossible even. He had been raised to value strength, control, and logic. Emotions were weaknesses, and soldiers didn't have the luxury of feeling uncertain. But now those old rules didn't seem to apply. He was supposed to be a father to a child that would bridge the gap between humans and the Zithrarians. But the more he thought about it, the more impossible it seemed. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. It was the queen. She had come to check on him, to speak to him again. He wasn't sure he was ready, but he couldn't avoid her forever. With a sigh, he stood up and opened the door. The queen entered, her presence filling the room with an energy that made everything else seem insignificant. She was as beautiful as ever, but today there was a seriousness to her demeanor. She was not here for small talk. "How are you feeling?" she asked, her voice calm but with an edge of concern. Genjigo didn't answer right away. Instead, he motioned for her to sit. "I'm struggling to understand this, to be honest. You say this child can change everything. But I don't see how. I've been fighting wars my whole life. Peace isn't something I've ever been trained for. And this," he gestured between them, the weight of the situation pressing on his shoulders. This isn't just a personal matter, is it? It feels like the whole galaxy is watching, waiting for us to fail. The queen regarded him with a steady gaze, her expression unreadable. You've always fought with a clear purpose, Genjigo. But not all battles are fought with weapons. Sometimes, the most difficult battles are fought within ourselves. Genjigo shook his head. I've never had a problem with facing an enemy. But this is different. How am I supposed to raise a child with you when I barely understand your people, let alone the responsibility this brings? I can't be what you need me to be. The queen leaned forward slightly, her tone soft but firm. You think you are unprepared, but you are wrong. You are a warrior, yes, but you also have something that few others have: human ingenuity. You think too rigidly, Genjigo. You have the ability to think outside the box, to find solutions when others see only obstacles. This child, this union, is an opportunity. You have the chance to build something that no one else could. Genjigo's brow furrowed. But how can I trust this? How can I trust that what we're doing will lead to something better, something worth all of this uncertainty? The queen's eyes softened. Because you are already part of this, Genjigo. You've been chosen not because of your military skills, but because of who you are as a person. You have the strength to lead not through force, but through understanding. That is why we are in this together. Genjigo felt a sense of unease and disbelief. This wasn't the type of fight he was used to. It wasn't about enemies, weapons, or strategy. It was about trust, about the future, and about being someone he didn't yet know how to be. But as the queen's words sank in, he began to realize something. Maybe he didn't have all the answers, but that didn't mean he couldn't try. He couldn't walk away from this, not when it had the potential to shape the galaxy. And maybe, just maybe, he could find a way to be the man the queen believed he could be. I'm not sure I can do this, Genjigo said quietly. But I'll try. I owe it to you, and to the child. The queen nodded, a faint smile crossing her lips. That's all I ask, Genjigo. Together, we will find a way. The days after Genjigo's conversation with the queen were tense. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing on him. And the more he thought about it, the more he realized that this was not just a personal matter. The entire galaxy seemed to be watching, waiting to see how this unprecedented union would unfold. As if things weren't complicated enough, word of the queen's pregnancy had spread through the Zithrarian royal court. The reaction had been far from positive. Factions within the Zithrarians, who had always valued tradition and purity, began to voice their concerns. Some believed that a human child would weaken their bloodline, and others saw this as a dangerous shift in their culture. The queen, who had always been a symbol of power and authority, was now under attack from within her own people. Genjigo could hear the whispers everywhere he went, guards murmuring in hallways, soldiers speaking in hushed tones, and even the royal advisors casting suspicious glances. The political landscape was shifting, and he was caught in the middle of it. It wasn't long before the queen called him to a private meeting. She looked as composed as always, but her eyes betrayed the pressure she was under. Genjigo, she began, her voice steady but with an undertone of concern. I need you to understand something. There are factions within my people who believe this child is a threat to our future. They see it as a sign of weakness, of betrayal to our bloodline. You and I both know that the Zithrarians do not take such matters lightly. Genjigo nodded, his jaw tight. So you're telling me there are people who want to destroy this child before it even has a chance? The queen's gaze hardened. Yes, some believe that by accepting this child, I am compromising the very essence of what it means to be Zithrarian. They fear that if the child grows to power, it will overshadow everything we've built. Genjigo's mind raced. He had seen the queen's strength firsthand, and he knew that her leadership was one of the few things keeping the Zithrarians from descending into chaos. But now, with a child on the way, there was more at stake than just her reign. This child represented change, a force that could either unite or divide entire civilizations. So, "What do we do?" Genjigo asked. "How do we stop this from tearing your people apart?" The queen looked at him, her eyes reflecting a deep sadness. "I don't know, but I do know that we cannot ignore the threat. I cannot stand idly by while my people destroy what could be our future. There are allies within the court, but they are few. I need you to help me find a way to unite my people behind this child." Genjigo was silent for a long moment, considering her words. The queen was right. If they didn't act soon, the situation would spiral out of control. He had never been a politician, but this was bigger than anything he had ever faced. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for a future that was uncertain and fragile. "I don't know how I can help," Genjigo said honestly. "I've never been one for politics. I've always fought with my fists, not my words." The queen placed a hand on his shoulder, a rare moment of warmth between them. "That's why I need you, Genjigo. You don't think like the others. You think like a warrior, like someone who has faced impossible odds and come out stronger. You can help me unite my people by showing them that we don't have to be afraid of change. We can use this child to forge a new future for all of us." Genjigo looked into her eyes, feeling the weight of her words. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the future of two species, two worlds that had never seen eye to eye, and somehow, against all odds, they had to make it work. "I'll do whatever I can," Genjigo said finally. "I may not have all the answers, but I won't let you face this alone." The queen nodded, a look of determination crossing her face. "Then we'll begin immediately. Together, we will fight for this child and for the future." The days that followed were filled with tension, and Genjigo's role in the growing conflict within the Zithrarian Empire became even clearer. As the queen's trusted ally, he was called upon not only to protect her but to prove his worth to the people of her empire. It wasn't enough that Genjigo had fought countless battles for humanity. Now, he was expected to face a different kind of challenge, one that tested not only his strength but his mind and character. The factions that opposed the queen's pregnancy saw him as an outsider, a threat to their pure bloodlines. They needed proof that he could stand alongside their queen, not as an intruder, but as an equal. The queen had arranged a series of trials, ones that would determine whether Genjigo was truly capable of playing a role in the Zithrarians' future. His military prowess was well known across the galaxy, but these tests would be different. They were not about brute force. They were about strategy, resilience, and the ability to think like a Zithrarian. The first trial was to be held in the heart of the Zithrarian Royal Arena, a place where only the greatest warriors and minds competed. As Genjigo entered the arena, he was greeted by the cold, calculating stares of the Zithrarian nobles. They sat high above, watching with judgmental eyes, eager to see if he would fail. The trial began with a mental challenge. He was given a puzzle, a series of complicated traps and obstacles that required not just physical strength, but keen problem-solving skills. The stakes were high. The Zithrarians wanted to see if Genjigo could think beyond simple brute force. At first, Genjigo felt the pressure. This wasn't a battlefield where he could rely on his combat skills. But then, he remembered the lessons from his own human experience, how quick thinking and adaptation had won him many battles. With a deep breath, he studied the puzzle, analyzing every move, every possibility. The Zithrarians watched in silence as Genjigo carefully worked through the challenges. His eyes narrowed, his mind sharp. He didn't rush. He didn't make mistakes. Each step was calculated, each decision deliberate. The puzzle was finally solved, and the arena erupted in surprise. Genjigo had proven that his strength was not limited to his fists. The queen watched from the sidelines, her gaze never leaving him. She knew this was only the first test, but it was crucial. She needed to show her people that a human warrior could be more than just a soldier. He could be a partner, a leader, a symbol of what they could achieve together. The second trial was a physical challenge. Genjigo would face off against one of the greatest Zithrarian warriors, a creature with immense strength and agility. The two stood across from each other in the arena, sizing each other up. The Zithrarian warrior snarled, clearly underestimating his human opponent. Genjigo's heart beat steadily as he prepared for the fight. He wasn't just fighting for his life. He was fighting for the queen, for the child, for the future. His every movement had to count. The battle was fierce, with both warriors exchanging blows that shook the ground. The Zithrarian was faster, more agile, but Genjigo's experience in close combat gave him the edge. With a final, powerful move, Genjigo disarmed the Zithrarian and stood victorious. There was silence in the arena for a long moment. The Zithrarians had expected the human to fail, but instead they had witnessed his strength, his resilience, and his ability to think and fight like one of their own. The queen stepped forward, her expression proud. She knew that with Genjigo's victories, the tide was beginning to turn in their favor. This was only the beginning, but it was a crucial step in proving that their bond could lead to something stronger than either species had ever imagined. As the crowd began to murmur with approval, Genjigo stood tall, knowing that this was only one battle in a much larger war. But for the first time, he felt like he was truly earning his place among the stars. The political climate within the Zithrarian Empire was becoming more complicated by the day. Although Genjigo had proven his strength and intelligence in the trials, the true test was still ahead. Winning the hearts and minds of the Zithrarians, who were still skeptical of his place in their world. His victory in the arena had earned him respect from some, but others continued to view him with disdain. As he walked through the grand halls of the Zithrarian palace, Genjigo couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The queen's political enemies were growing bolder, and even her most trusted advisors were beginning to question her judgment. But despite the pressure, the queen had remained calm, focusing on the long-term goal, the future of the child, and the unity that it could bring to the galaxy. One evening, as Genjigo sat alone in a quiet courtyard, lost in thought, he was approached by someone unexpected. It was Commander Talia, a high-ranking officer in the Zithrarian military. She had been one of the fiercest critics of Genjigo's involvement with the queen, but now she was extending an olive branch. "Genjigo," Talia began, her voice firm but respectful. "I know we've had our differences. I've questioned your role here, and I've questioned the queen's decisions. But I've also been watching you, your ability to adapt, your strength, and your mind. I think you might be the key to bringing our people together." Genjigo raised an eyebrow, surprised by her sudden change of heart. He had never imagined that someone like Talia, who had once viewed him as an outsider, would offer him an alliance. "What are you asking?" he asked, wary of her intentions. "I'm asking you to help us," Talia replied. "The queen's vision is noble, but there are those who are too afraid to embrace it. There are factions that want to maintain the old ways, the ways of war and division. But I believe, like you, that peace is possible. The child you share with the queen could be the catalyst for that peace, but only if we stand together." Genjigo studied her carefully. He knew that Talia was not someone who would make such a bold statement without reason. There was something genuine in her eyes, something that made him pause. "What do you want from me?" he asked. "I want your help in convincing the others," Talia said. "You've already shown them your strength. Now, you need to show them your wisdom. I believe that if we can unite enough of the influential factions behind this child, we can prevent a civil war. But we need someone like you, a human who has seen the galaxy from a different perspective, to be the voice of reason." Genjigo thought for a moment. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was bigger than one battle, one fight. This was about the future of two species and the possibility of a new era. If he could bring together the Zithrarians who were on the fence, he might be able to make a real difference. "I'm not a diplomat," Genjigo said, rubbing his chin. "But I can't stand by and watch everything fall apart. If you think I can help, then I'm in." Talia's expression softened, a rare smile crossing her face. "I knew you would understand. Together, we can convince the Zithrarians that this child, our child, is not a threat. We can prove that unity is the only way forward. With Talia's support, Genjigo began working behind the scenes to build an alliance with the more progressive factions of the Zithrarians. They held secret meetings, carefully navigating the complex web of politics. There were moments of tension, but Genjigo's diplomatic skills were sharper than he had ever imagined. He knew that words, not weapons, were his greatest weapon now. Meanwhile, the queen remained a figurehead, trusting Genjigo and Talia to gather support. She knew that the child, once born, would be the true test of their efforts. But as Genjigo met with influential leaders, he felt the tide beginning to turn. There was hope, however faint, that peace might be within reach. Genjigo had never considered himself a politician, but as he stood in the heart of the Zithrarian palace, surrounded by his new allies, he began to realize that his fight was far from over. The true challenge was only just beginning, convincing an entire empire to embrace a future that was both uncertain and bright. The pressure was mounting. As the queen's pregnancy advanced, so did the tension within the Zithrarian Empire. Genjigo could feel it every time he walked through the halls of the palace, every time he met with another faction leader, every time he spoke in front of the Zithrarians. Some were still unsure, some were still skeptical, and some were still desperate to hold on to the old ways. But things were slowly changing. With Talia's help, Genjigo had managed to form a growing alliance of like-minded Zithrarians who were willing to listen. They were beginning to see the potential of the Queen's child, how it could be a unifying force, a chance to build something stronger than years of war and division. But that didn't mean the journey was over. There were still many who feared what a half-human, half-Zithrarian child could mean for their future. And so, Genjigo had been asked to do the one thing he dreaded most: speak to a larger group of influential leaders. The moment was set for the next council meeting, where all the major factions would gather. The queen had told him that this was their last chance to unite the empire. They needed to make their stand now or risk civil war. Genjigo wasn't a diplomat. He was a soldier. Words were never his weapon of choice, but he had been thrust into a position of leadership, and it was time to use every ounce of his training, every bit of his ingenuity, to fight for this new future. He arrived at the council meeting with Talia by his side. The massive chamber was filled with Zithrarians, each representing a different faction: warriors, scholars, traders, and politicians. They all stood in a semicircle, eyes fixed on him as he stepped forward, their expressions a mix of suspicion, curiosity, and defiance. Genjigo felt the weight of their gaze. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the future of their people and the future of the galaxy. The queen had prepared him for this moment. She had told him that the Zithrarians valued strength above all else, but they also valued intelligence, strategy, and creativity. Genjigo wasn't just a brute force warrior. He had a mind capable of thinking in ways that the Zithrarians couldn't always understand. This was his advantage. Taking a deep breath, Genjigo spoke. "I understand your fears," he began, his voice firm but calm. "I know that many of you see this child as a threat, a child born of two worlds. But I ask you to think beyond your fears. I ask you to think about the future." He paused, letting his words sink in. The room was silent. "The future is not something we can control with the strength of our weapons alone," Genjigo continued. "I've fought battles across the galaxy, and I've seen how war destroys everything it touches. I've seen what happens when fear controls a people, but I've also seen what happens when different races, different species, come together. We are stronger together. And this child represents that strength." Genjigo's words were simple, but they were powerful. He knew that the Zithrarians were afraid of what they didn't understand. They feared the unknown. But what Genjigo was offering wasn't just the chance to survive. It was the chance to thrive. "This child could be the key to a new era," he said, his voice growing stronger. "An era where we no longer fight for control, but where we fight for unity, where we fight for peace, where we fight for something bigger than ourselves. There was a long silence. Genjigo could feel the weight of the moment. This was it. This was his chance to show them that humanity's greatest strength wasn't just in its ability to fight. It was in its ability to adapt, to change, and to find new ways to solve problems. Slowly, a few of the faction leaders began to nod. Some exchanged glances, unsure of what to say next. But others were starting to listen. They were beginning to see that perhaps, just perhaps, Genjigo was right. The future didn't have to be shaped by fear. It could be shaped by courage, by unity, and by the belief that together, they could build something greater than any war. Talia stood beside him, a look of pride in her eyes. Genjigo had done it. He had shown them the human advantage, the ability to think outside the box, to find solutions that others couldn't see. As the council meeting continued, Genjigo knew the battle wasn't over. There were still many obstacles to face, but for the first time, he felt that the tide was turning. Maybe, just maybe, they could build the future they had all dreamed of. The council room was alive with murmurs. Genjigo could feel the tension in the air as the various factions debated quietly among themselves. The room was large, the walls adorned with symbols of the Zithrarian Empire's long history, of war, conquest, and dominance. But today, the conversation was about something far different. Today, it was about the future. Genjigo stood at the center of the room, flanked by Commander Talia and the Queen. The once clear divide between those who supported the union of humanity and the Zithrarians and those who opposed it had narrowed. The speeches, the discussions, the heated arguments had all led them here, a critical vote that would decide whether or not the child of the Queen and Genjigo would be accepted. He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of the various leaders, some with doubt, others with hope, and still others with fear. It was clear that the battle was not over, but there was a shift in the atmosphere. Genjigo had earned respect, not through force, but through his willingness to listen, to reason, and to show them the strength that came from unity. The Queen had been by his side, guiding him through this process, but today, it was Genjigo's words that had begun to change the tide. He had convinced many of the influential factions that the child they had once feared could be the key to a lasting peace. But as the final vote approached, he still couldn't shake the feeling of uncertainty. It was time. The council leader, an elder Zithrarian with a calm and commanding presence, stood up and called for silence. The time has come. The leader's voice echoed through the chamber. We will now cast our votes. Will we embrace this child as a symbol of a new beginning, or will we reject it and face the consequences? Genjigo's heart raced. This was the moment he had fought for. This was the moment that would decide not just his future, but the future of two species. His gaze flicked to the Queen, whose eyes remained steady and focused. She, too, was waiting for the decision. One by one, the council members began to cast their votes. Some stood, some sat, and some remained still, their faces unreadable. Genjigo felt the weight of their eyes on him. Each vote a challenge, each decision a step toward either peace or war. Finally, the last member cast their vote. The council leader turned to face the room, the results in hand. There is no turning back now, he said. The vote is complete. Genjigo held his breath, waiting for the outcome. The council leader slowly unfolded the results. This child, the leader announced, will be accepted as the future of our people. We will not let fear guide us. We will choose unity over division. The Zithrarians and humans will stand together, not as separate worlds, but as one. A wave of relief and shock rippled through the room. The opposing factions remained quiet, but the majority had spoken. The child, Genjigo's child with the Queen, was now a symbol of hope for the galaxy. The Queen stepped forward, her voice soft but filled with power. This is just the beginning. Together, we will build something greater than we could have ever imagined. This child will lead us to a future where all our peoples can thrive in peace. Genjigo felt a mix of emotions, relief, pride, and a sense of responsibility that weighed heavily on him. He had never thought of himself as a leader. He was a soldier, but today he had become something more. He had helped shape the future of two worlds, two species. The journey was far from over, but this victory, this moment, felt like a promise. As the council members began to speak among themselves, discussing the future, Genjigo turned to the queen. "We did it." The queen smiled, her eyes filled with gratitude and something deeper, hope. "No, Genjigo, we didn't just do it. We began something that will last forever." And with that, Genjigo knew that this was only the beginning. Together, they had forged a future built on the strength of two worlds coming together, side by side, for the first time. The days following the council's decision were filled with a strange mixture of excitement and caution. Genjigo couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment, but the reality of the situation still lingered. The child he was going to raise with the queen wasn't just a symbol of their union. It was now a symbol for the future of two species. For the first time, the possibility of true peace seemed real, but the journey ahead would be anything but easy. The queen had been more than gracious in her support for him, but now the true challenge began. The entire galaxy would be watching as they navigated the new political landscape, and any misstep could undo everything they had worked so hard to build. Genjigo couldn't ignore the weight of the responsibility on his shoulders. Still, there was a quiet sense of hope growing among the people of both species. The Zithrarians, once divided on the issue, were slowly beginning to accept the future that had been chosen for them. Even some of the more skeptical factions were softening their stance. They had seen the power of unity, the strength that came from working together instead of fighting. One day, as Genjigo walked through the palace, he was stopped by one of the queen's advisors, a trusted Zithrarian named Vylar. The advisor had been one of the most vocal supporters of the alliance from the start, and now he had come to speak with Genjigo about the next steps. "Genjigo," Vylar said with a rare smile, "the people are starting to come around, but now we must focus on the rest of the galaxy. If we are to lead, we must show the universe that our cooperation is real." Genjigo nodded, appreciating the seriousness in Vylar's voice. "I understand. We need to prove that what we've started here can spread beyond our borders. This is bigger than just the Zithrarians and humans. It's about every species who has fought and bled for peace." Vylar's expression turned thoughtful. "Indeed. It's about showing them that unity is not just an ideal, it's a reality. The first step is to meet with the other factions and present them with our vision. We need them to see what is possible." Genjigo agreed, knowing that their success would depend on how well they could inspire other races to follow their example. They weren't just building a relationship between two species, they were laying the groundwork for intergalactic peace. It was a daunting task, but Genjigo had never backed down from a challenge. The queen, too, had been preparing for the next phase. Together, they began organizing a summit with leaders from all corners of the galaxy. It would be the first step in creating a new order, one where cooperation and shared purpose took precedence over conflict. It wasn't going to be easy. There were powerful forces that would try to sabotage their efforts. But Genjigo had learned long ago that no battle was won without a fight. As the day of the summit drew closer, the air was thick with anticipation. Genjigo, standing by the queen's side, knew that the future of not just their child, but the entire galaxy, rested on the success of this meeting. They had already proven that unity was possible within their own empire. Now, they needed to prove it to the rest of the universe. When the summit finally began, the leaders of various races, each with their own unique challenges and cultures, gathered in one place. Genjigo could feel the tension in the room, but there was also a quiet hope that this would be the beginning of a new era. As the leaders took their seats, Genjigo stood alongside the queen, ready to begin the most important conversation of his life. This was the moment. The rise of a new era had begun. The summit was underway, and Genjigo stood at the front of the grand hall, his heart pounding in his chest. Around him, leaders from different races, each with their own unique histories and struggles, filled the massive space. They were all here, gathered under one roof, not just for the Queen's child or the Zithrarians, but for something much bigger, the possibility of peace. Genjigo had never felt so much pressure in his life. He had fought in countless battles, stood on the front lines of war, but this was different. This was not about defeating an enemy. It was about building something from nothing. It was about bringing together worlds that had been divided for centuries and showing them that peace was not only possible, it was necessary. The Queen stood beside him, her presence commanding yet calm. She looked out over the gathered leaders, ready to address the room. Genjigo had seen her lead before, but today it felt like the stakes were higher than ever. She turned to him, her gaze meeting his. There was a silent understanding between them. This was it, the final test. "We are here today," the Queen began, her voice strong but filled with warmth, "to lay the foundation for a future that will benefit us all. A future where differences are celebrated, not feared. A future where we choose unity over division, cooperation over conflict." The room was quiet, and Genjigo could feel the weight of the moment. These leaders, some skeptical, others hopeful, were all waiting for the same thing, to see if they could truly trust the vision the Queen and Genjigo had presented. Could they believe that peace was achievable? Could they believe that the child of a human and a Zithrarian could be the key to their future? Genjigo stepped forward, his voice steady but with a strength that surprised even him. "We know that peace is not an easy road. There will be challenges, setbacks, and even those who will try to stand in our way. But the choice we face today is simple. We can continue down the path of division, of war, of endless conflict, or we can choose to build something better, for ourselves, for our children, and for the generations that will come after us." The room remained silent, the weight of his words settling in the air. Genjigo could see the leaders exchanging glances, weighing their options. Some faces were still hard, unsure, but others seemed to soften. The child, his child, was not just a symbol. It was a chance for a new beginning, a living testament to the idea that different worlds could come together and thrive. "Genjigo is right," the Queen said, turning to him with a small smile. "This child represents all that we can achieve when we look beyond our differences. But it is not just about this child. It is about each and every one of you. It is about the choice we make now, together." And then, the moment they had all been waiting for arrived. The leaders began to speak, one by one. Some voiced their support, while others remained uncertain, still clinging to old fears. But as the discussions continued, it became clear. The majority of the galaxy was ready for change. The final vote was cast, and this time, there was no hesitation. The message was clear. Peace was not just a dream, it was now a reality. Genjigo's heart swelled with relief, but he knew that this was just the beginning. They had succeeded in convincing the galaxy to believe in a future built on cooperation and unity, but there was still work to be done. The road ahead would not be easy, and there would be more challenges to face. But for the first time, Genjigo felt a sense of hope, a hope that things could be different. As the meeting adjourned, the Queen turned to him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "We've done it, Genjigo," she said softly. "This is the future we've worked for." Genjigo nodded, his heart filled with pride. "We've done it, together." And in that moment, he knew that the future they had started to build would continue to grow, stronger, united, and filled with hope.